Hey guys, Dov here, and it's that time again. It's been a few months since the last Warhammer 2 DLC, and with none on the immediate horizon, I felt I finally had enough knowledge to make a new tier list. And since I learned how to edit videos, this one will finally have decent production value. If you want to help me create more content like this, be sure to like and share the video, subscribe, check out my Patreon if you feel so inclined. But before we get too far ahead, let's remind ourselves why tier lists are still mostly garbage. First, they're very subjective. Players have varying perceptions on factions and matchups. Different languages even have their own sub-metas. The game also gets frequent updates, so things stay fluid, and even within a patch, metas change and evolve over time. In any given match, an almost infinite number of variables can affect the outcome, like faction matchup, map, player skill, style, or state. Are they tired, hungry, drunk, high as a kite? All this to say, I don't want you to draw absolute, concrete conclusions from this tier list. Most top-level players agree, there are no truly bad factions and no totally unwinnable matchups. Next, let's talk about how I make my tier list. On a spreadsheet, link below, I list all the factions' matchups and rate them -1 for bad, 0 for even, and +1 for good. Each faction is scored and grouped into tiers according to their score. I always got feedback from top players, but this time they had a lot more direct role in helping me decide the matchups. This is another reason this list is semi-decent. So big thanks to Aerocrastic, Falcon, Flying Taco, Hadriz, Feral War, Lotus Moon, Romulan Dog, A-Move Hacker, Rame, and anyone else I missed from the QSA Discord. Without further ado, let's get started. Starting from the bottom, flying low and alone is Bretonnia. Poor Bretonnia, free-falling from B to F with an abysmal -5. Previously, they were close to middle of the pack, but new tools for the Dark Elves and Skaven tilted those matchups back towards even. Buffs to Footlords also made some matchups harder, like Dwarfs, despite the addition of Gotrek and Felix, Raponce, and Henri Le Massif, plus fixes to Pegasus Knights. Bretonnia still struggles with low leadership and a lack of anti-large armor piercing. In other words, big armored monsters are scary for them. They're also one of the only factions that struggles to kill armored infantry. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. After all, faction mains sometimes think their army is bad, more on that in a future video. Thankfully though, they still kill most elves like the best. Speaking of which, Wood and High Elves follow up in D tier. Last summer, I had ranked the Wood Elves among the top factions, and now they are D tier with a -4, so what changed? Well, for starters, Empire and Dark Elves got new tools to help in this matchup, but the biggest thing is people figuring out what I call the Bretonnia problem, which is the Wood Elves' struggle to stop mass heavy cavalry. Other factions like Empire and High Elves can exploit this weakness, while the Tomb Kings and Dwarfs can both outshoot and outgrind the Hippie Elves. Their missiles and mobility still match up well versus Lizardmen. Wood Elves are in sore need of an update though. They have several roster holes and their campaign feels very outdated. Until then, they will likely remain near the bottom, though they are certainly very scary in the hands of a skilled player. The same can be said of High Elves, who only slid slightly from C to D with a -3. Not much changed for them outside of Fiery Convocation's buff, making Techless better versus Horde factions, though the new Skaven tools make that matchup even worse. They still have the least cost-effective roster across the board. They still get beat up by all three Chaos factions, plus Bretonnia and Lizardmen, and Empire, due to their low HP. However, their elite stats, excellent range, and best-in-game healing still allow them to grind through vampires of all kinds, Wood Elves, and even Dwarves. Tied for the most tilted matchups, the High Elves appear to be next for the DLC treatment, so look for them to bump up in future lists. Now getting to the meat of the list, we have 3 Old World classics for C tier, with Dwarfs, Greenskins, and Beastmen. Dark days indeed for the Dawi. Skaven assassins running rampant, new Dark Elf chariots, and buffs to chariots in general knocked the Dwarfs from A to C with a -2. Rush factions with good armor-piercing chariots like Beastmen, Chaos, and Greenskins still give the stunties fits, while some specific interactions even out the Norsca matchup. It's not all doom and gloom though. Buffs to Footlords have made them much more potent, and Gotrek and Felix provide some nice hero options for every dwarf commander. Their counters to traditional heavy cavalry means manlings dare not challenge them. Likewise, they're still the best shooting faction in the game, and thus can outblast zombie pirates and outlast the Wood Elves. So of course, their most hated foe would follow next. Not too much of a drop for the boys, just B to C with a score of -2, which is pretty good considering they are probably about to get some new toys. We already talked about the stunties, and their status as the top rush faction means they can outbash the beasts, though Norsca and Chaos are more even. As always, they struggle with spooky undead and big, stompy, healing monsters, but their surprisingly flexible roster allows them to adapt to most situations just fine. Having a lord that's harder to snipe would certainly help leadership issues, so hopefully we get something like that with the update. With the Beastmen, we get our first big jump up, stampeding from F to C with a cool -1. All I can say is, spawn spawn, summon summon, spawn spawn, summon spawn. The price reduction to Chaos Spawn surprisingly helped them a lot, and people finally figured out mass summon builds. Also, the successive buffs to Giants are paying off big time for the Beastie Boys, allowing them to rumble in monster fights without getting absolutely run over. They still struggle versus the best in armored healing monsters, see Lizardmen, Tomb Kings, and Vampire counts. On the flip side, their hyper-aggressive style makes rats run and overwhelms High Elves and Dwarfs, as mentioned. Beastmen have a few roster holes to fill, so hopefully they get a rework at some point soon, but things are looking up in Gotland. And for a nice curve, we have the biggest chunk in B tier: Skaven, Warriors of Chaos, Lizardmen, Norsca, and Dark Elves. Staying right where they are with a 0 score, the Rat Horde got some new tools while still maintaining their overall design. They still struggle with spooky undead, but units like Grinders and Triads help versus those pesky mass mobility builds. The new lore of stealth is a nice touch, though not as competitive compared to the other two Skaven lores. The ability to ambush dwarves made them even easier targets, but in general, the increase to stealth is hard to use versus players with proper scouting. Other than a necessary Giselle nerf, their old tools are still just as potent, and they still have a relatively easy time versus the Lizardmen. They can out-attrition most elves, though the more aggressive and mobile wood elves are still pretty even. Given their strength, look for the rats to maintain their position well into the future. Dark clouds gather in the wastes as Game 3 slowly inches closer to release. Warriors of Chaos press on, still potent and powerful, but clearly showing their age. They dip slightly from A to B, still with a respectable 0 score. You don't see as many Chaos players these days because of the lack of updates. Don't let that fool you into a false sense of security. Archaon's host can still hold its own and even thrive against the likes of Bretonnia, High Elves, and Dwarfs with good armor-piercing shock damage. Vampires of all kinds will still cause attrition problems, and Dark Elves can challenge you in a variety of interesting and painful ways, much to the delight of Slaanesh. How long will the Chaos Gods tease and torment us before unleashing their full fury? Who knows, but I, for one, am ready for the end times. Fittingly, their ancient rival, the Lizardmen, sits next to them, chilling like a slan in B tier with a 0 score. The Lizard Folk got their second DLC, which took some time to gel and, like the Skaven, stayed totally within their design. They stayed big, slowish, stompy dinosaurs, only this time they got the triple XL treatment with the Dread Saurian. Razordons and more Salons strengthened their missiles and magic, respectively. They still struggle versus strong armor-piercing missile factions like Dark and Wood Elves, Pirates, Skaven, and Tomb Kings, but can smash and grind with the best in melee. They straight up trample Bretonnia, Greenskins, and Beastmen, and can outgrind Counts and High Elves. Like a slumbering Slan, I don't anticipate them moving much over the next few centuries. Who would have thought the faction with the least lord choices would also have the least tilted matchups? And that number would be the same. With favorable conditions against High Elves and Bretonnia and disfavorable conditions against Vampire Coast, Norsca is a powerful faction that should be in every tournament player's arsenal. The ability to have a good or even matchup when picking first puts you in a great position for most typical pick and ban formats. While Norsca could absolutely use a rework, the tribes punch hard. A mammoth may have been eclipsed as the biggest monster in the game, but it will always have a special place in our hearts. Sir the Egg, Legendary Lord Wen. Not like the cold dead hearts of the Dark Elves, by far the most successful knife ears, they jumped from C to B with a +1 score. While Malice isn't the force of nature some hoped he would be, he did bring along the most powerful chair unit in the game, even after the nerfs. Along with these, the Scream Tank and the dismounted USA, plus the Beastmaster, added some nice tools to the Druchii while maintaining their previous power. As a result, they can now reliably take on Vampire Counts, Dwarfs, and Chaos, with Lizardmen remaining favorable as well. They'll struggle against the missile attrition of the Skaven, Pirates, and Tomb Kings, but overall, Dark Elves are well positioned to take you away and do terrible, unspeakable things to you. Now for the good stuff. I would like you to make note as we move into A tier. Besides Empire, the remaining factions all have something in common. Can you guess what it could be? If you guessed that they were all filthy undead scum, you were right. My personal grievances with crumbling aside, Vampire Counts still have more than enough healing to overcome their complete lack of ranged units and lack of leadership because crumbling. Vampire Counts jumped from C to A with a +3 mostly because people remembered they were good. Buffs to already good units like Graveguard and Black Knights certainly help. Army-wide fear gives them an automatic advantage over the likes of Skaven, Greenskins, Beastmen, and Bretonnia, and they have all the tools to deconstruct the Tomb Kings. Elite Elves of high and dark varieties are trouble, and the obstinate Lizards won't be budged, but Counts have few fears these days. The last bastion of life among the top factions, the Empire maintains its near-top position in A tier with a +3 score. They unexpectedly got a DLC with a huge update giving us a template for quote-unquote old world factions to receive more DLC in the future. They already had one of the most flexible rosters in the game, and only got more options with Marcus and his huntsmen. While war wagons are of questionable tactical value, their style points are off the charts. Gotrek and Felix make their final appearance, which makes choosing Empire heroes harder than choosing where to eat with your girlfriend. The Empire has favorable matchups against the two remaining top-tier factions in the Coast and Tomb Kings, plus two of the bottom in High and Wood Elves. With only one bad matchup in the Dwarves, they are also an excellent choice for tournament players to master. And finally, in S tier, oh look, more undead. Who would have thought? I don't want to beat a dead horse too much, but Crumbling and Army-wide Fear make undead factions very powerful. Jumping from A to S with +4, Tomb Kings trade the raw healing of Counts and firepower of Coast for the most well-balanced undead roster. Don't worry, even though they don't get lore of vampires, they still get lore of Nehekara and a free Shabti summon in every game. We've talked about most of their matchups already, so I won't take too much time here. They have a pretty bad matchup versus Coast though, since the pirates can't outshoot them and their fancy constructs. Last and absolutely least, the zombie pirates of the Vampire Coast. They were S tier before, and they're still S tier, and tied for the most tilted matchups. At 8 and 3, that gives them 11 tilted matchups and the highest score of +5. At this point, I've talked about all the matchups, and zombie pirates smell terrible, so let's call it a day. Thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to tell me how wrong I am in the comments. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and share, subscribe for more, and we'll see you next time.